Welcome back to Crime in Court. We are going to continue reading through the Delphi trial transcript. And this episode is part 20. We have three witnesses that we're going to hear from, all law enforcement. The first one is David Vido, who I believe he was part of the search warrant. He was at Richard Allen's house serving the search warrant on his home. Then we have Lieutenant Jerry Holman with ISP. He's his own thing. I don't even want to say what he is. He's just a horrible, horrible man. For railroading an innocent man, I believe that Jerry Holman, Liggett, and maybe Mullins were all possibly part of trying to either they were so narrow-sighted in their investigation, or they just really wanted to make a case for someone to fit, and they didn't care who. And that's what I think may have happened here. And I think they're the reasons why. And they are a unified command, remember? So Lieutenant Holman is part of that unified command also. So we'll hear from him very briefly. And then we're going to hear the direct examination from Melissa Oberg. We heard about her in the last episode. She is the firearms examiner for the state, and we're going to hear a little bit of her direct in this episode. And then we'll continue on with her in future episodes because it's going to take a few episodes to get through her testimony because she's on for a while. All right, so let us please get started. Hit that like button for me if you haven't done so already, and subscribe also if you aren't a subscriber, because it will you'll get notifications when these videos are available. All right, so let's continue. We have a very brief little back and forth between the court and the attorneys here after so we went off the record for the afternoon in the last episode, and now we're in the last portion of the day. Each day usually has like four parts. So there's a morning, then there's a break, and then there's a second part of the morning, then there's a lunch, then there's some afternoon testimony, then a break, then some more testimony. So we're on that last part. And the court says, "Are we ready, gentlemen?" Mr. McLeland says, "Yes, Your Honor." Mr. Baldwin says, "Judge, I don't know how. If is Mr. Holman going later today?" "Yes," says Mr. McLeland. Baldwin says, "There's questions that I think I should be able to ask, but to Mr. Holman when he testifies, and I think they're appropriate, but I do not want to run afoul of anything the court finds inappropriate, because God forbid, with all of her motions in limine that she, excluded the defense from basically having a defense. And I didn't know if you want to do that, take care of that now, or because then before the jury comes in, or have the jury leave after Mr. Vito's testimony." Court says, "Who's testifying next?" or Dave Vito," says Mr. McLeland. "Oh, okay. And how long will he take?" McLeland says, "I don't think very long. We have pictures from the search warrant, and we're going to attempt to introduce through him, and I think there's about 30 pictures, and go through those. I don't think it'll take long, Judge, but depends on Cross, I suppose, too." Court says, "Right." Mr. McLeland says, "But we're going to go through the pictures quickly. I don't think it'll take long." Court says, "So, what specifically about, you can sit down. What specifically about Trooper Holman are you inquiring about?" McLeland says, "Judge, would it help if I clarified that the intent on calling Mr. Holman today would only be to talk about his participation or his presence at the search warrant and statements made by Richard Allen while during the search of the house?" "Okay," says the court. McLeland says, "We plan on calling Mr. Holman, or sorry, Lieutenant Holman, again after the lab tech about a second interview with Richard Allen." So they're calling Holman twice. They're going to recall him later on after another witness testifies so they can ask him questions about that. Okay. Does that help, Mr. Baldwin says, yes. I mean, we'll have to have those conversations at a later time, but yeah, thank you. Judge says, sorry, Ms. Auger says, Judge, may we approach? Judge says, sure. Sidebar conference conducted. You're going to ask him about these today? Mr. McLeland says, yes. Ms. Auger says, I mean, these are from authenticated hearsay documents. Mr. McClellan says this is from information he took from the that was downloaded from Google. That's from here. Google. That's not authenticated. Mr. McClellan says, I don't think you have to be for him to testify about that. The court says, what are you talking about? Mr. McClellan says, Judge, Ms. Auger says, maybe we should go over here. So, Judge, the state believes that the defense has opened the door at this point to talk about other digital evidence that they found of Mr. Allen that connects Richard Allen. We made that point pretty clear with the questioning today with Stephen Mullen. Dave Vido, he executed the search warrant for based off of, and we have our first inaudible 6 minutes in. Woohoo! Um, was based off of inaudible that we found. The bailiff says, "You know this doesn't open the door to you for you guys to talk. Thank you." He says to the crowd, the audience. Mr. McLeland says, "Google returned the warrant with this information and search history from Google. Dave Vito examined that return and the report based off of the return." The court says, "Okay." Mr. McLeland says there were websites that were searched, including. May I look at the list? Ms. Auger says yes. Mr. McLeland says another thing that's inaudible that tie him to the safe key. Uh, sorry, the kidnapping that tie him to the kidnapping. Ms. Auger says right. These are unauthenticated hearsay records from Google, and to allow him to testify to that without the proper authentic court cuts her off and says, is there a keeper of the record? McClellan says, is not, or there is. I don't have it with me. Oh, there is a keeper of the record? I believe so. I think when we got the information back from Google, I think, well, usually, yes. They're not signed as Google, says the court. Mr. McLuhan says, I don't have that today, and so I can print off all that and provide that to them. Are you saying that this was something that he searched? Ms. Auger says. Mr. McLellan says, it's in here. This. He's searching these. Ms. Auger says, this is from after he was arrested. Mr. McLellan says, no. Yeah, it is, she says, 1/1/2023. Mr. McLellan says, it's on here. He went to the websites connected with those searches. You can't connect this to that. Mr. McLellan says, okay. Ms. Auger says, I mean, this is, unless he's, Mr. McLellan says, 65 best kidnapping. He searched it on October 5th of 2022. Okay, but this isn't that. This is something from. Okay, says McLeland. Ms. Auger says 1/1/2023 when he was in Westville. Mr. McLeland says that's when the officer, unless he's doing, this is so hard to follow. McLeland says went to the website and just pulled the cover sheet. Court says so it'll come up later. McLeland says we'll talk about this later. Ms. Auger says okay, thank you. Sidebar conference concluded. Whatever that was about. Obviously, there were Google searches of I think it was like best kidnapping movies or something like that, but she's arguing that these occurred in 2023, which is after he was already arrested. So he was doing that from his prison cell or something, doing those searches. So the court says, all right, are we ready to bring the jury back in? McLeland says, yes, Your Honor. Court says, okay, let's bring them in. The bailiff says, all rise. Jury enters the room. Bailiff says, thank you. You may be seated. Court says, thank you, gentlemen. Mr. McLeland, you may call your next witness. Your Honor, the state of Indiana would call Indiana State Police Trooper Dave Vido. So ISP Trooper Dave Vido. Direct examination by Nicholas McLeland. Mr. Vito, the microphone that you have in front of you, it doesn't amplify for the defense or the jury or for the state. It only amplifies for the audience. So I'm going to ask you to speak up as best you can so everybody at my table, everybody at the defense table, and the jury can hear you. Fair enough? Just have to say this every time. It's very annoying. He says, "Yes, sir. Will you state your name, please?" David R. Vito. Will you spell it? And he does. How are you employed? As a detective with the Indiana State Police assigned to the Lafayette Post. And how long have you been a law enforcement officer with the Indiana State Police? Over 10 years. And do you go through special education, training, or training to become an Indiana State Police officer? I did. I graduated the Indiana State Police Law Enforcement Academy after the 6-month academy and have taken since then numerous trainings every year, law enforcement trainings every year, including IMPD's Homicide Investigation School and Reed interviewing. They take courses in abusive tactics to get a confession out of people, whether they're innocent or guilty. That's what Reed interviewing, the Reed technique is. You resort to lying, cheating, doing anything basically that you can, dehumanizing the individual in front of you until you get a confession. That's what the Reed technique is. This guy openly admits that he takes classes for that. I wouldn't in today's day and age, now that people are understanding abuse and it's clear abuse. The Reed technique is an abuse of power, it's an abuse of human rights. It's awful and it should not be allowed. So, anyways, that is horrific. He's just openly admitting, yeah, I take Reed interviewing technique courses to expand my training so I can get guilty confessions out of innocent people. Okay. I want to take you back to October 13th of 2022. Were you on duty that day? Yes, I was. And did you assist in the execution of a search warrant for the home of Richard Allen? I did. How were you involved in that search? I witnessed pictures being taken and helped search for items in the residence. So you assisted in the search of the home? Yes, sir. What areas did you search in the home, if you know? So he didn't take the photos, but he's introducing the photos. How does that make sense? Shouldn't it be the person who took the photos? Mainly, I searched the master bedroom, the master closet, the garage, kitchen, and the office, and spare bedroom. And while you searched the residence, when you could find an item that you collected from the search, would someone be there to photograph that item? Yes, Troop, and would go ahead. Trooper Matthew Clemens. And were you present when Trooper Matthew Clemens photographed the items? Yes, sir. So Matthew Clemens did the photographing, and this person is going to be apparently he was there for every single item that was photographed, and he's going to introduce all the items, I guess, because he found them. Clemens took pictures of them, I guess. I'm going to show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 247 through 275. Can you go through those photos, please? Yes, sir. These were photos taken during the search warrant. And those aren't all the photos taken, correct? That's correct. These are, but there are some of the photos taken. That's correct. And you realize those are photos that were taken, again, during the search warrant of Richard Allen's home. Yes, sir. Judge, the state would move to admit what's been marked as State's Exhibits 247 through 275. No objection, says Ms. Auger. Court says, all right, without objection, they're all admitted. McLeland says, and would ask permission to publish to the jury. Court says, you may. Trooper, Judge, is it okay if I proceed? Yeah, you can proceed. Okay, thank you, Judge. Trooper Vito, I'd like to direct your attention to the TV here in the courtroom, and I'd like to go through these photos and just briefly describe each photo. Yes, sir. We're going to start with State's Exhibit 247. Can you explain to the jury what that is? Yes, this is a picture of the outside of Richard Allen's residence located in Delphi, Indiana. State's Exhibit 248. This is an angle, a different angle of Richard Allen's residence where you can see his vehicle parked in the garage. State's Exhibit 249. This is Richard Allen's 2016 Ford Focus. That was the vehicle he drove to the trails on February 13th. Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation from the officer. Mr. McLeland says, fine, Judge. I'll move on to a different question. But, like, you should strike that or something because the witness said that that was the car that Richard Allen drove, and that's not a fact. That's just what law enforcement wants us to believe because they want us to think that that's what is on the uh, Hoosier Harvest Store camera. But yeah, that just lingers. We still get to the jury still heard that and thinks Richard Allen drove the Ford Focus, probably, because there was no instruction to cure that in any way, nor was there an ask for it. So that might have been, kind of a slip up on the defense. All right. So was this vehicle in the home that you searched on October 13th? Yes, sir. It was in the garage. Okay, State's Exhibit 250. This is another picture of his vehicle with different lighting and a different angle. And I want to draw your attention to the wheels in this picture. Are you able to see light projecting through the wheels on the vehicle? Yes, sir. State's Exhibit 251. This picture is taken inside of the garage still. It is the doorway there is the entry to the house that would go into the laundry room. Next to the doorway, there's a storage rack and boots that were stored outside the entryway. State's Exhibit 252. What is this a picture of? So this is still inside of the garage. This workbench would have been on the other side of the car, and the car was blocking, and we located numerous knives on the workbench and in the drawers, a couple box cutters. Remember that one, I can't remember who it was. Was it Dan Doolin? They're all blurring together for me now, these witnesses, even though it's like we just did them a couple days ago, but they're all blurring together. I can't remember who it was who was like, yeah, I was just lying in bed and all of a sudden I was like, it dawned on me a box cutter, or no, he was in his garage actually. He saw a box cutter in his garage and he was like, oh yeah, it must have been a box cutter. Wasn't that convenient because they found box cutters? I mean, who doesn't have a box cutter in their house? Most people, right? States Exhibit 253. These are the knives that were located in the garage out of the sheaths. So these are the knives in the previous picture, State's picture 2, Exhibit 252, just out of the holder of or the sheath of the knife. So they took them out of the sheaths and took pictures. Yes, sir. Okay. State's Exhibit 254. Where are we now in the house? This picture moves into the kitchen of the house. This is in between the refrigerator and the stove with a little basket and contained what you would carry like every day, like sunglasses, keys, Richard Allen's name badge, a box cutter, and two knives. But he used them for his job, like daily, multiple times a day. So to say because he had knives and box cutters or whatever, that's That doesn't prove guilt. That doesn't prove anything. Were the knives in the box cutter when you searched the home? Where were those? I believe they were either in the basket or right next to it. And in the basket is a name tag with Rick's name on it. That is correct. State's Exhibit 255. This picture was taken in the office. It is of a plastic bag that had a bunch of cell phone chargers and other device chargers, electronic device charging cables. States Exhibit 256. These were all of the phones that were located in the office, locating or including the pagers and the older flip phones. So they took pagers and flip phones, really, that were not being used. Well, I guess in 2017, I guess a flip phone could have been his. I mean, that's still kind of late for flip phones, but still. So there was also phones located in his Richard Allen's closet in the master bedroom. The only phone that we were not able to recover was the one from February 13th, 2017. Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation. He has no idea what other phones they may have had that might have been there, says Miss Auger. Overruled. Wow. Go ahead, Trooper. Like I said, these were the phones that they had kept in the office, and when we looked at the phone information that we had that he did have from February 13th, we were not able to find that phone in those collections. You also found phones in the bedroom? That's correct. Is there a picture of those phones? I do. There is a picture of them. It's not included with these pictures, but I believe it was of two other flip phones and two walkie-talkies. Okay. States Exhibit 257. These were knives that were found inside the home, I believe inside the master bedroom. States 58. These are the knives from the previous picture, but out of the sheaths. I want to move to States Exhibit 259. This picture is in the master bedroom. This would have been Richard Allen's closet in the master bedroom. States Exhibit 260. Still inside Richard Allen's closet with the gun cases and shoes. States 261. Still inside of the closet with the boots and the shoes underneath the clothes. States Exhibit 262. This picture moves into the foyer of the home. This was the coat closet located in the foyer, and a picture of a jacket that was similar to what he described he was wearing on the 13th of February. States 263. That's just a picture of the back of the jacket. Move on to States Exhibit 264. This is a picture back in the master bedroom. This was the Sig Sauer 40 caliber firearm that Detective Liggett located in Richard Allen's nightstand next to the bed. And were there two magazines found with that firearm? I believe so, yes. And were those loaded? I do not recall if they were loaded. Are they loaded in the picture? Yes, sir. States Exhibit 265. It is this is a picture of the serial number of the SIG firearm. States Exhibit 266. It is another picture, different angle of the firearm. Exhibit 267. This is another picture of the firearm and the ammo that was in the magazine. And States Exhibit 268. That is the 40 caliber blazer round that was in the magazines of the firearm. Now, I believe when I read the top of that, it says Blazer and it looks like it has on an S and W on it. Can you explain that? That's a 40 caliber Smith & Wesson. And what is Blazer? What does that identify? That would be the name of the ammunition. States Exhibit 269. This is of a picture of a memory box or a keepsake box that was located in the master bedroom. States Exhibit 270. This is a picture of the inside of the box that contained numerous items from Richard Allen's previous employment, graduation cards, a note from his mother, and there was also a 40 caliber hollow point Winchester round located on the lower left side of the box that was similar to the round found at the crime scene. States Exhibit 271. Another picture of the box with different items located in it. States Exhibit 272. This is a closer up image of the round that was located in that box. Then States Exhibit 273. This is a picture of the back, the Winchester 40 caliber Smith & Wesson round. Now both this round and the rounds that were in the gun have Smith & Wesson on them? That's correct. Can you explain why they both and are they of the same brand? Different manufacturers, I believe, one being Blazer, one being the Winchester. One was a hollow point, the other was full metal jacket, but same caliber of round. Same caliber of round. Sorry. Why do both have Smith and Wesson on or S&W on them? Do you know? I believe it's just the same caliber of the round is. Huh? Okay, but the brand. You're saying Winchester and Blazer are different brands. I believe so. Yes. Okay. States Exhibit 274. This is a picture that I took in the spare room. It is of a photo album he took. I thought the other trooper was taking, but okay. It's a photo album that was stored in that room. I mean, words matter. Just saying, words matter. Like if that were me and it was me and a partner, we were taking the pictures, like I was holding the thing and he was taking the pictures, I would say either Trooper so and so took pictures or we took the pictures. I wouldn't say I took the pictures. Like the words matter, right? So like little things like that just stick out with me. So it makes it inconsistent to what he said. And I don't like that. But anyways, just something I noticed. So this is a picture I took in the spare room. It is of a photo album that was stored in that room of different pictures of the Monon High Bridge and the trails. It appeared that Richard Allen and his family had gone out to the trails multiple times a year, and they documented the photos in these photo albums. The earliest, I believe, that I was able to find was from 2008. So I believe everybody in this town knew of the trails and often went to these trails. If not everybody, almost everybody able-bodied that could would go to these trails because that was the thing to do because this is a small town, there's not a lot to do, and when the weather's nice, that's what you do. So the fact that this family has photo albums of these trails and they live there is not at all surprising to me and shouldn't be to anybody. But we're going to try to make that seem like Richard Allen's guilty of something because he has photo albums of him and his family at these trails when I'm sure he's not the only one in this town that has photo albums of them and their family with this trail and the Monon High Bridge. Anyways, then finally, States Exhibit 275. These are other pictures from the photo album going from our right to left. The caption is a little bit cut off, but the picture is from February of 2016, and I believe the caption says, Ricky posing by a tree. The middle picture, so he obviously didn't caption that himself, I'm sure. So that was probably his wife or somebody. This is not like, okay. Anyways, him being by a tree somewhere on the trails doesn't equate murderer, but that's what they're trying to insinuate. The middle picture is from March of 2016 of Richard Allen fishing in Deer Creek. And then the one all the way on the left is a picture of Richard Allen from April of 2016 looking down off of the Monon Trail. Okay. After you concluded the search warrant at the house, were there the items that you collected, were they sent to the various Indiana State Police labs to be tested? That is correct. First, myself and Trooper Clemens transported them to the state police post and secured them. I don't have any other questions, Judge. Thank you. Ms. Auger, says the court. Thank you, Your Honor. And we begin cross-examination of the witness, David Vido, with Ms. Auger doing the questioning for the defense. Trooper, how do I address you? Trooper is fine. Okay, Trooper Vido, I want to show you pictures 270, 271, 272, and 273. Yes, ma'am. Now, it's important, you can keep those. It's important to conduct a search in a professional way. Yes? Are you asked? Yes. Yes, ma'am. Okay, and especially when you're dealing with the murder of two young girls? Yes, ma'am. And you were supervising the photography? I would say that's correct. Incorrect. All right. Were you there and pointing things out to the photographer? Multiple detectives were there, and when we would find an item that we were going to collect, they would take a photograph of it before we would take it. Well, he made it sound like it was him and this photographer that they were a pair and they were doing it together. Did he not? That's the impression I got from the way that he explained it. And now we're finding out that this photographer is just moseying about in the room until the detectives need him, right? So what's he doing? I don't know. It doesn't. And so are the detectives actually or troopers actually like with him when he's taking the photographs? I have questions about the quality and integrity of these things and the investigation here. He says multiple detectives were there, and when we would find an item that we were going to collect, they would take a photograph of it before we would take it. And what about those photographs? Did you supervise those photographs? I was present when they were taken. And you would want to make sure that those photographs were taken in a very professional way? Yes, ma'am. Okay. And you made sure that someone photographed the bullet end of the cartridge, is that correct? I don't believe I made that's a good point because this is coming back to bite them in the butt, this bullet. And he's like, yeah, yeah, I was there for all of that. And then, oh, wait, no, I don't know. I don't believe I made sure that they did that, but they did take a picture of that. Okay. Did they, though? Because we didn't really get all of the picture, all of the photograph of the bullet. Okay, so we have the bullet end in a copper color, right? Yes, ma'am. And then we also made sure, or, that we also made sure that we got the other end of the bullet, correct? Yes, Trooper Clemens did take a picture of that. Okay. And what do you call I'm not a, never touched a gun. What do you call that end? I'm not sure. That would be where I can't think of the exact term. How about the non-bullet end? The opposite end? Correct. The opposite end. All right. So you've got both ends of the bullet, right? Correct. And someone's holding the bullet. Correct. And this is a bullet that you seized. That is correct. And you sent it to the crime lab. I'm unaware if that was sent to there. All right, but you wouldn't want to change it or damage it in any way by photographing it, right? I don't understand your question. I'm sorry. Well, by photographing it, is it possible you may change it in any way? Not to my knowledge. Okay, meaning there was no restrictions. You could have taken as many photographs as you wanted, right? Not like some testing where if you test something, you can no longer test it anymore. You lose the uh, specimen. That's the word I'm looking for. Well, by photographing it, is it possible you may change it in any way? Not to my knowledge. Okay, and there's a picture of someone's hand in the picture. That's correct. Is that unprofessional? I don't know how they would have taken a picture without having to move that from the box. Okay, from how it was sitting in the box. So it wouldn't be unusual to have a photograph of someone's hand holding a piece of evidence in order to properly document it. Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry. Probably not. Let me try. It's not unprofessional for someone to hold a piece of evidence to properly photograph it. I don't believe so. Bam, you just impeached whoever it was that collected the bullet now. I don't remember. Yeah, you guys let me know. It's so like they're all blurring together for me, but whoever it was that was there, I want to say it was earlier on. I'm totally blanking. Maybe they'll talk about it here. Okay, items 274. Okay, photographs of the Monenhigh Bridge. That's correct. All right, and you have no idea who took those? I do not. It's not uncommon at all for people in Delphi, Carroll County, even Tippecanoe County to go out to the Monenhigh Bridge Trail. Judge, can I have a few foundational questions? The court says yes. Are you familiar with what families do in Carroll County and Tippecanoe County? I am not. Are you familiar with what pictures families in Carroll County and Tippecanoe County take? I am not. Are you familiar with what families in Tippecanoe County and Carroll County visit the high or the trails and the high bridge? I am not, other than who I've interviewed. Judge, I'm going to object to the question. It calls for speculation. Sustained. What an ass. You know Betsy Blair frequently went to the Monenhigh Bridge Trail? Yes, ma'am. She's from Tippecanoe County. I was unaware she was from Tippecanoe County. All right. And you know that Rayleigh Voorhees went up to the Monenhigh Bridge Trail? Yes, ma'am. Frequently. I don't know frequently. You don't know that? She testified to it. Okay. And you know Bree Wilbur goes out to the trail, right? Yes, ma'am. I know she did. Right. You know David McCain goes out to the trail. I believe so, yes. All right. In fact, the trail has been improved, is that correct? From what I've heard, yes, ma'am. All right. And have you ever passed by the Carroll or the Delphi town signs? Which signs, ma'am? Any of the signs that say kind of welcome to Delphi. I believe so. Entering town, yes. All right. And the Delphi kind of advertises these trails, right? I'm not too sure about that. I've interviewed people that have lived here, their whole life, and they don't know the bridge or the trails existed, and I've interviewed people that have went out there. Fair. Now, I'm going to show you picture 275. Yes, ma'am. Are those photographs of Richard Allen? Yes, ma'am. Less than a year before Abby Williams and Libby German disappeared. I believe so, from what was written on the captions on the sides of them. Okay. Obviously, Richard Allen didn't take those pictures. It doesn't look like it. So the pictures in the photo album, apparently, they're looking at, I think. Or he's a gifted selfie talker. Selfie taker, sorry, a selfie taker. He's a gifted selfie taker. Okay, describe his hair for me. On the one image that was all the way on the right, he's wearing a hat. On the image in the middle, it looks to be short. And then on the image that was all the way to the left, I'm unable to see exactly what his hair was. Okay, kind of your length, possibly. Hair's not curly, is it? I can't tell from the two pictures. Were you present during any interviews of Richard Allen? I was present viewing them, not in the room, but viewing them, yes. You were present in another room, watching it by video? That is correct. All right. What was the length of his hair? I do not recall at that time. Okay. Now you took a picture of a bunch of knives, right? Trooper Clemens took the pictures. I'm sorry. There were pictures taken of a bunch of knives, right? That is correct. And Richard Allen, are you aware that he has a fishing license? I was not aware of that. I find that hard to believe since they're all these offices are talking and doing these investigate although maybe they're in silos and not talking to one another, but they're all doing these different investigations and maybe no one's communicating what's being told to them. Unified command might not be relaying the information that they're getting from their different police departments. He says, oh, sorry. All right. So, not unusual for hikers or fishermen or even people who live in the country to have a lot of knives? I couldn't say. Just depends, I suppose. Okay, I'm not a fisher person either, fisher woman, but I think people use knives to do that, right? To fish? Yes. I don't know how they'd use a knife to spearfishing, possibly. All right, well, you cut lines, right? That might get tangled. Okay. Scissors or something? All right. And I think you fillet fish. That's correct. All right. So that wouldn't be uncommon for a fisherman to have knives like that. Sure. Fillet knives. Sure. All right. Not uncommon for people to have box cutters? Sure. All right. And the phones. People frequently recycle phones, right? It depends on the person if they save them or recycle them. All right. And you have no idea what phones Richard Allen kept and what phones they might have recycled or disposed of or traded in? From what we saw at the residence, it appeared that they had kept a majority of their phones. All right. There are a lot of pagers and pagers. I mean, people haven't carried pagers for a long time. Would you agree? I would agree. All right. So all of these go back years and years and years, right? That's correct. All right. And if you don't know if at some point maybe they changed their habits in terms of recycling or turning in phones, correct. I don't know. So maybe they never returned their phones in before, but maybe they got like new contracts or something and kept getting new phones without having to turn anything in or whatever. You don't know their deals and how they got a new phone. And every phone company had different packages going on at different times. You could get a free phone all the time. So maybe, you know, they bargained with the different promotions and stuff to use for their cell services. Next question is, all right. And you don't know if at some point maybe they changed their habits. He says, correct, I don't. And again, blue Carhartt jackets, lots of people have blue Carhartt jackets, right? I couldn't tell you, really. I hate these witnesses that just won't give an inch to the defense. Like seriously, lots of people. I would assume lots of people have blue Carhartt jackets. Millions are probably made every year and sold. I can't tell you. All right. I don't know. Not unusual for people to have a Sig Sauer gun. I'm sorry. Not unusual for people to have a Sig Sauer gun. I couldn't say. All right. In fact, you collected other people's Sig Sauer guns in the course of your investigation. I don't believe I collected any. Are you aware that other Sig Sauer guns were collected in the course of this investigation? I'm unsure which ones were. All right. What is your role in this investigation? I was assigned in April of 2019 full time in a temporary duty assignment to assist in the investigation. And you don't know what evidence was collected? I was not present during the entire investigation from 2017. Was it important to kind of get yourself caught up? I did. I went through the evidence the best that I could, the large binders to see what we had in evidence. Now press him on that then, because she didn't. She's just changing topics now. She says, now the blue Carhartt jacket you collected, you sent it off to the lab. I believe it was sent. Okay. Anything, it was tested? I believe it was tested. Anything linking Richard Allen to the murder of Abby Williams from the coat? From the coat, I was not aware of anything that they found at the lab. So the coat that he says he was wearing doesn't have anything that of significance value that the lab found. So basically, no ties to the girls. Okay, anything tested from the coat that links Richard Allen to Libby German? Nothing that I'm aware of. You seized his car, his 2016 Ford Focus? Yes, ma'am. Okay, anything in the car that linked Richard Allen to the murder of Libby? The vehicle was on the camera at the Hoosier Harvest Store. Richard Allen's 2016 Ford Focus is on the Hoosier Harvest Store? I believe so. You can prove that? I believe so, yes. Okay, and you proved it by a license plate number? By the description, the look of the vehicle, and the time that we were provided by Mr. Allen and the time on the video. Okay. Lots of black Ford Focuses in the country, right? I don't know. All right. Anything that you tested inside of Richard Allen's 2016 Ford Focus that can be linked to the murder of Libby German? I do not believe so. So you wanted to say, or you wanted to sit here and tell us, yeah, his car is linked to this crime because you saw it on the Hoosier Harvest Store. Yet, nothing on his clothing that he was supposedly wearing that day, and nothing on in his car links him to the crimes. So make that make sense. How is he your guy if that is the case? Anything you tested of Richard Allen's Ford Focus that can be linked to Abby Williams? I don't believe so. All right. All the knives. Did you find a single knife that you can link to the murder of Libby that was located at the residence? Yes. No. Okay. What about Abby? No. Okay. Now there was clothing missing from the crime scene, correct? I believe so. Yes. All right. There was a girl's sock? Yes. And a pair of girls' underwear. I believe that's accurate. So now we're learning there was a sock from one of the girls and underwear of one of the girls that's missing. I don't know if I knew that. I think this might be new news to me. I knew there was something missing, but I wasn't sure exactly what it was. All right, so you did everything you could to search everywhere in Richard Allen's house, right? Yes, ma'am. And his car? Yes, ma'am. I think people even were digging in his yard, is that right? I believe they were using a metal detector. Did they try to dig up some things? I believe so. All right. You ever find the girl's pair of panties? No, ma'am. Okay. Did you ever find the girl's sock? No, ma'am. So they weren't at Richard Allen's home. That's pretty significant. Now, Sarah Carbow gave a description of a man walking on 300 North. Recall that? I was. I don't believe I was involved in the investigation at that point. Okay. Well, that's a pretty important piece of evidence because that establishes the endpoint of your timeline, right? I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I mean, Sarah Carbow's statement is very important because it establishes the end of your timeline when you believe these murders occurred, right? It was a witness, a statement from a witness that we took into account. Yes. And that helps to establish your timeline. Possibly, yes. Possibly? All right. And are you aware that Sarah Carbow gave a description of an individual covered in blood? I believe so, yes. All right. And blood transfers to different fabrics? I believe so, yes. Right. And someone covered in blood who got in their car, you can test for that blood years later, right? If the blood were to transfer, yes. Yes. And there was a lot of blood in that crime scene, right? How it was explained to me was that the blood could have dried to that point, that it could have been dried to that point. And it, who explained that to you? Just during the course of the investigation, talking to different law enforcement entities. Okay, what is he talking about? That the blood could have dried on Richard Allen so super quickly that it didn't transfer to his clothing or his car? That makes no sense. That makes no sense. What? Okay. I don't recall exactly who. Are you telling us that dried blood can't transfer? I'm not sure. All right. So whoever murdered Libby and Abby probably had a significant amount of blood on their clothing, right? Mr. McClellan says, I'm going to object to the form of the question, Judge, and not to mention it's outside the scope of direct at this point. Sustained. Nothing further. Mr. McClelland. No other questions, Judge. Thank you. Does anybody on the jury have any questions for Detective Vito? No response or indication from any juror. Court says, all right, thank you, Detective. You may step down. You may call your next witness. Mr. McClellan says, Judge, the state of Indiana would call Indiana State Police Lieutenant Jerry Holman, please. The witness is sworn in, and now we will begin direct examination of Holman. Mr. McClellan says, will you state your name, please? And he does. How are you employed? With the Indiana State Police. And how long have you been employed with the Indiana State Police? 23 years, 23 and a half years. And did you go through special training or schooling to become a law enforcement officer? Yes, I did. And what are your current duties? My current duties is my rank is lieutenant and I'm assigned as the area investigative commander. I oversee all criminal investigations over Area 1, which includes Lafayette Post, Peru Post, and the Lowell Post. I want to take you back to October 13th of 2022. At this time, did you assist in the execution of a search warrant at the home of Richard Allen? Yes, I did. And you were assigned to assist? Yes, supervise. Supervised. What was your role in that supervisorily, what? I can't say that right now. In a supervisory capacity. Supervisorial capacity? What's with the big word, Nick McLeland? Sorry. At the search warrant on, is that even a word? I don't know. At the search warrant on October 13th of 2022, initially, I did a walkthrough with a crime scene investigator to make sure that he took photos of how the property was. Just in case we damaged something, cut carpet out, cut drywall out, I did the walkthrough, and then after that, I was sitting outside watching. So we did a quick walkthrough and just sat and watched. So let me slow you down a little bit, okay? Sorry. You did the initial walkthrough, and photographed the house? Yes. Did you then talk to Richard Allen? Yes, I did. What did you tell Richard Allen? I told him that if we damaged his property, there was a form that he could fill out and that we were going to do our best not to damage it. And if there was a locked box or something like that, we would come to him to get keys. What was his response? He said, it doesn't matter. It's over. After that, what did you do? After that, I sat outside the house back where the garage was and I observed, made sure nobody came in the house while the team of detectives were searching the house. How much do you think he got paid just to sit there on his fat ass to make sure no one entered the home? Does anyone sit in the car with you? Yes. Who? Mr. Allen. And did Richard Allen say anything to you while you were sitting in the car? Yes. For the most part, he was really quiet. He got out a couple times to smoke cigarettes. He was sitting in my car because his wife needed to use the restroom and she went to her place of employment and he asked me if we detained his wife and I said no. At some point, did you offer to drive him to his wife? Yes, I said, if you're concerned about her, I can drive you to the place of her employment if you want me to. And what was his response? He said, it doesn't matter, it's over. So he says the same thing twice now? I doubt it. I think this is embellished by Holeman. After you were complete, or after detectives were completed with the search, was Richard Allen free to go? Yes, he was. After the search was done, what happened next? I did another walkthrough with to make sure that we didn't damage any property, and then I spoke to Mr. Allen and told him again if he finds any property damage, there's a form he can fill out, and we'd reimburse to get it taken care of. After the items were collected from the home, were you able to view some of those items that were collected? Yes, I did. And specifically, were you able to view the 40 caliber firearm that was collected? Yes. And do you have that here with you today in court? Yes, I do. Your Honor, with your permission, I would ask the lieutenant to be able to retrieve that item and display it to the jury. You may, says the court, and has it been marked as an exhibit yet? Mr. McClellan says not yet. I wasn't sure how exactly to mark that, Judge. The box? Just mark the box. Okay. Trooper, would you remove the box the firearm is in from the other box? And Trooper, can you tell the identification number on that box? State police number is ending in 748. The item number is 314. And do you know that to be the gun that was collected from Richard Allen's house? Yes, sir. Your Honor, the state would move to admit what's been marked as State's Exhibit 276. Mr. Baldwin says no objection. The court says all right without objection. 276 is admitted. Lieutenant, I'm going to ask you to open the box. Trooper Holeman, before uh you just called him lieutenant and then you called him trooper, but whatever. Before you open the box completely, is the box sealed? Yes. And is it marked with some identification of who sealed the box? Yes. And who sealed that box? Well, it's been sealed a couple of times. Each time the box is open, it's resealed? Yes. And each time it's resealed, the trooper or law enforcement officer who opens or seals it, do they sign the seal? Yes. And why do they? Initials. I'm sorry? Initials. Initial the seal. Thank you. And why do they do that? Just to show that the person that opened it resealed it, then they log it in and log it on P the PR and R. To have a good chain of custody? Yes. And are you cutting the tape from the last time that you sealed it? Yes. And are your initials on the seal from the last time you sealed it? Yes, they are JDH. I put the date on them. Sometimes I put the date at least one time and then JDH on all the seals. You may continue. Trooper, I'm going to ask you to open the box. And Trooper, before you display the firearm to the jury, can you ensure that it's cleared for safety purposes? Yes. Will you now display it to the jury, please? The exhibit is public. He shows it to the jury. McClellan says, no other questions, Judge. The court says, Mr. Baldwin. Mr. Baldwin says, thank you. Now we've got some cross of Jerry Holman. Mr. Baldwin says, so by the time you rolled into Richard Allen's house, it was a few hours after his October 13th, 2022 videotaped interview, correct? Yes. And he was a suspect at that time? Yes. And obviously, because he was a suspect, you would have on a tape recorder at all times so that when it came back later on, maybe a couple years later, you'd be able to play that for a jury, the words that you said that Richard Allen spoke to you in your vehicle, correct? No, he did not record those words of "it doesn't matter, it's over anyways," that he kept saying he said. So you didn't. No, I wasn't interviewing him. He made comments to me voluntarily. He was a suspect. There was a lot of suspects. Yes, he was. You had one of these on you? I did. Tape recorder on that? Probably audio, body cam. He says, yes, there is tape recorder. And you chose not to tape record it. Yes. And he had asserted his innocence a few hours earlier at that videotaped interview, correct? Yes, I believe. Yeah, yes. And now you guys roll in with a bunch of police cars, block off the street, correct? I don't think the street was completely blocked off, but we were impeding the flow of traffic, I would say. At that time, Richard Allen, he knows because in this videotaped interview, he's been accused of taking the girls' lives. Yes. And he's aware of that. I believe so, yes. It's a couple hours later, right? And his demeanor at the videotaped interview did not look like one that was somebody that had taken the lives of anybody, right? Do you agree? During the interview? Yeah, the videotaped interview. I would say demeanor changes, but I wouldn't be able to judge that unless I went back and looked at it. But yeah. Yeah, that looking at the videotape interview would be a great resource for figuring out what his body language was and whether it was to reflect a person that might have taken the lives of somebody, correct? That is correct. He lived in a neighborhood, right? Yes. So everybody in that neighborhood would have seen the grouping of police officers coming into Richard Allen's house and conducting the search. Objection calls for speculation, Judge. Sustained. How many times has that box been opened that has the gun in it? Do you know? Without looking at the property record receipt, it's hard for me to tell, but I would say it's been opened more than. I've opened it twice. That's the second time I've opened it, and I know it's been opened one other time to do the analysis, so at least three times. So this doesn't tell you whatever is on the box or in the box, on the box, written on this box, doesn't tell you how many times that it's been opened, does it? I mean, it does, but it's hard to read. It's hard to explain. I see one signature on here, chain of custody or chain of possession. I see one signature. Yeah, we don't use that. Judge, may I approach? Yes, says the court. Sidebar conference conducted. Mr. McLeland says, Judge, we've stipulated to the chain of custody for the firearm. Court says, well, why are we doing this? There's a stipulation. It is an agreement to the parties. Mr. McLeland says, why did we get to? Mr. Baldwin says, Mr. McLeland says, into the. Baldwin says, we did stipulate to the chain of custody, but we are allowed to talk about on closing argument whether or not somebody could have opened it. We can stipulate to there's two different concepts there. The court says, no, you're not. When you stipulate to chain of custody, you're stipulating that there is an unbroken, appropriate, real chain of custody. Why are they stipulating to everything then? And now claiming that it isn't is not a stipulation. Baldwin says, all right. McClellan says, Judge, I would ask the court to at least admonish the jury that the parties have stipulated as to the chain of custody. She says, I will. Mr. McClellan says, thank you, Judge. Sidebar conference concluded. Hate these two, McClelland and Gall. They're like in it together, it seems. The court says, okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would advise you, as members of the jury, that the parties have stipulated to the proper chain of custody of this evidence. You may proceed. Mr. Baldwin says, thank you, Judge. Betsy Blair, a credible witness? I believe so, yeah. Sarah Carbow, a credible witness? I believe all the witnesses are credible. Saw two different people, though. Described two different people. Judge, I'm going to object. This is outside the scope of direct. Sustained, of course. Bullet at the photograph in the photograph. Bullet in the photograph with somebody's hand this way. There's nothing wrong with that, is there? No. In fact, when there's an important piece of evidence like a bullet, you would expect it to be photographed in many different ways once it's picked up from wherever it. I'm going to object to the form of the question, Judge. Sustained. Really? You're trying to pick apart the investigation. And in order to do that, this is a law enforcement investigator who is pretty high up there in the Unified Command. He's a lieutenant at the ISP. You'd need him to explain custody, chain of commands, things like that. You can use him as an expert for, conducting an investigation, even if he's your not your witness. You can still use him to explain, like, well, wouldn't you expect to do this in an investigation? Like, isn't that typical protocol? Like, you can say those things. You can ask those kinds of questions, and she's not allowing it. She's just like, no. Judge Gull says no. If there's anything wrong with the photographer taking a photograph of a bullet in multiple positions, depends. Can a bullet be damaged from photography? It could be damaged by handling it and moving it. Dirt would fall off, skin cells would fall off. So, if it's something that you believe may have DNA, you should probably limit the amount of times that you would move it, would be my. But you do have to move the bullet at some point in time. You do. But sometimes you can limit the movement by just putting it onto a secured location. Seal it, take it back, let the professionals or the experts laboratory do it. So we should expect the lab, in this case, to have the full bullet, both front end, back end, and side. I would say so, yes. Okay, thank you. No other questions. Mr. McLeland? No redirect, Judge. Thank you. Does anybody on the jury have any questions for Lieutenant Holman? No response or indications. Court says no. All right. Thank you, Lieutenant. You may step down. And refresh my memory, ladies and gentlemen. That was the last witness of the day, the judge says. Sorry, McClellan says, Judge, yes. The court says, okay. Mr. McClellan says, State would ask for a recess until tomorrow. Court says, okay. All right. I just want to make sure because I knew the six of us talked about that. I just wanted to make sure. He says, yes, Judge. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the evidence that we have prepared for you for the day. So we're going to take a little bit of an early evening. Again, while you're outside of the courtroom, please keep your minds open. Please don't form any opinions or conclusions about anything. Since you will be in the company of the bailiffs, all three of the bailiffs, for the rest of the day and over in the evening, you can't discuss this case. So please don't do that. Please have a safe and peaceful evening, and we'll see you all in the morning. Gentlemen, all rise. The jury leaves, the court says, and you may be seated until we can get the jury out of the building. Is there anything that we need to do outside the presence of the jury, Mr. McLeland? He says, no, Your Honor. Mr. Rosie, I don't think so, Judge. Thank you. She says, thank you. As soon as we get word from the bailiff that we can let everybody out, we'll let everybody out and we'll make the evidence available to the media. Thank you, Judge. Thank you. Thank you. Jody, you can go off the record. And that's where we're going to end. Oh, no, that's not where we're going to end. I should. It's only been an hour. You know what? I want to, but I'm going to keep going with Melissa Oberg's testimony. So maybe we won't get through all of it, but let's get through at least some of it because she's, like I said, she's on the stand for quite some time, Melissa Oberg. So let's at least get it started, shall we? So we were back on the record the following day, which is October 25th, 2024 at 9:02 a.m. Court says, "All right. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are back on the record in State of Indiana versus Richard Allen. I'll show the defendants here in person with counsel, states here by the prosecutor and his deputies. We are in the courtroom outside the presence of the jury who has assembled. Is the state ready to proceed?" Mr. McLeland says, "Yes, Your Honor." "And is the defense ready?" "Yes," says Mr. Rosie. Mr. Luttrell says, "Your Honor, if I may ask, if I may just make a," she says, "Yes. I don't think this will be long." "Okay. I just wanted to let the court know I will be asking the firearms examiner to remove the pistol from the box." "Okay." Mr. Luttrell says, "And cycle it, making sure first that it's empty and so forth." Court says, "Right. That's fine. That's fine." The bailiff says, "All rise." The jury enters the room. Bailiff says, "Thank you. You may be seated." Court says, "Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to see you back this morning. I hope you had a pleasant evening. Again, as you have had access to your phones for purposes of contacting your family and checking work email, always under the supervision, however, of all of our bailiffs, I'm going to go through the questions that you are going to be reciting back to me at the end of the trial. Ladies and gentlemen, have you read, seen, or heard any media accounts concerning this case?" Jurors nod or shake their heads no. "Have you discussed this case with anyone?" Jurors respond no. "Have you permitted anyone any have you permitted try that again. Have you permitted anyone to discuss this case with you?" All jurors respond in the negative. "Have you conducted any research into this case?" All jurors say no. Has any has anybody persisted in attempting to discuss this matter with you? Jurors say no. All right, again, thank you kindly, ladies and gentlemen, for continuing to follow the court's directive. Mr. Luttrell, you may call your next witness. Mr. Luttrell says, "Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning." Court says, "Good morning." Mr. Luttrell says, "We would ask Melissa Oberg take the stand." So Mr. Luttrell for the state will be doing the questioning of firearms examiner Melissa Oberg. "Please state your name for the record and spell your last name for me." She does. "And we've been reminding every witness, I think that was probably a good level, but just keeping your voice up so the people all the way in the back and counsel can hear. We would appreciate that." The witness says, "Thank you." "Where are you employed?" "I am currently employed through an outside place. It's not through the Indiana State Police currently. I'm employed through a clinical asset management company that manages health care items." What? That makes no sense. "And what do you do there?" "I'm an operations data analyst." "What was your previous employment?" "I was employed by the Indiana State Police at the Indianapolis Laboratory." So she worked for the lab for ISP. "And you resigned from the state police when?" "In April of 2023. The When employed with the Indiana State Police, what was your role?" "My role at the Indiana State Police was a forensic firearms examiner." "How many years did you have with the Indiana State Police?" "Just over 17. "And when you began with the state police, what was your assignment?" "I was a forensic drug chemist." "And how long were you a drug chemist?" "I was in that unit for approximately 11 months total." I think that surprised Mr. Luttrell. "And then you transitioned where?" "I then interviewed for the firearms position and I transferred into the firearms unit at that time." "How long were you in the firearms unit at the Indiana State Police?" "I was in the firearms unit from that 2006 November timeframe until the point in which I left in April of 2023. "And what were your duties when you were a firearms examiner? As a firearms examiner, my primary duties were to examine ammunition components such as bullets and cartridge cases, as well as cartridges. It could be shotgun ammunition as well, and I assessed them for their class characteristics as well as doing comparisons to each other or to a firearm if one is submitted. I also did function exams of firearms to see if they functioned as designed by the manufacturer. I also did tool mark examinations with which a tool mark examination could consist of bolt cutters, pry bars, anything that could you could think of to be used as a tool in any type of manner to gain leverage to either break into something or be used in a crime. So I did tool mark examination as well. I also did serial number restoration. I did distance determination and also entry into the integrated ballistics identification system. What is your educational background? I have a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from St. Joseph's College, which I obtained in 2005, and I also have a Master of Science in Applied Data Analytics from the University of Indianapolis, which I obtained in May of 2023. As you were completing your studies for your master's and coming to the end of that ordeal, is that when you resigned from the Indiana State Police to your present employer? Yes. Did you leave the Indiana State Police voluntarily and on good terms? Yes, I did. Have you remained involved in the firearm examination community and work? Yes, I have. Would you explain that to the jurors, please? I still currently sit on the Organization for Scientific Area Committees as an affiliate. That is sponsored by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I remained as affiliate because as a private person that works in industry that they thought my knowledge would be good to be obtained for the firearms sections there. So I still sit on there. I'm a non-voting member currently, but used to be a voting member. I also am a distinguished member of AFTE, which is the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners, and I still reside on some committees where I will help create documents and best practices for both of those committees that I sit on. What is AFTE? She just said that it's the Association of Firearms of Mark Examiners. They are responsible for for presenting research and developing examiners. What? Okay, sorry. They are responsible for presenting research and developing examiners and setting best practices that examiners should follow. So, like professional development for toolmark examiners. In fact, AFTE is a premier organization for firearms examiners in this country. Is that correct? That's correct. And you've served on their leadership or served on committees and so forth? Yes, I sat on the board of directors for approximately 6 years as the treasurer, and I have served on various committees such as the Research and Development Committee and other committees associated with the treasurer. When you transitioned to your present employment and left the Indiana State Police, were you asked to retain or to stay with the two different committees or organizations that you serve on currently? Yes, I have been. I've also been asked by the current president to be added to another committee that she has for this year. So, are you a member of any professional organizations? Yes, I'm currently still a member of AFTE, the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners, and I'm also still a member of OSAC as an affiliate, which OSAC, again, is the Organization of Scientific Area Committees. Is the Indiana State Police Firearms and Tool Mark Unit, is it accredited? The Indiana State Police Laboratory as a whole is accredited, so they are accredited by the American National Standards Institute National Accreditation Board. Say that 10 times fast. Up until your resignation and moving on to a new area of work, were you certified as a tool or firearms and tool mark examiner? So up until I left, I was certified as a firearms examiner through the Association of Firearms and Tool Mark Examiners. And I was also certified as a fellow through the American Board of Criminalistics. And have you testified in court as a firearms and tool mark examiner? Yes, I have. Can you tell the jury how many times? This is my 112th time. And have you done so in both state and federal jurisdictions? Yes, I have. This is scary, folks. She's coming off as a very competent, bright, smart, scientific woman who is at the height of her career. She's very, she's been contributing to the narrative of tool marks examinations and all that, being on these organizations and whatnot. She's also testified 111 times prior to this and really building up her credibility, right, guys? Right? She sounds credible so far. But until you realize what she did to make this bullet found at the scene and the bullet at Rick's house, or the to match a bullet fired through Rick's gun, is incredible. Like beyond comprehension. It's comparing apples to oranges. So the to reiterate, the whole spent bullet versus unspent. So an unspent bullet means like it didn't go off. All the stuff is still inside there, but it got cycled through the gun somehow. So it's a live round of ammunition, but somehow it like went through the, I don't know. I don't even understand, but somehow it went through the chamber and then it was released without being fired. Okay. And with that comes certain tool markings, so they say. And so that's what they're saying is what happened to this round, this unspent round at the scene. Well, then this firearms examiner comes along and she's like, oh, yeah, let me take a bullet and try to recreate all those markings on that bullet from the scene by doing what the state is saying he did, which was it cycled through the gun and didn't fire and all of that. And she didn't get the same markings. So what does she do? She fires a bullet through the gun and determines, oh, I got the same markings now. So it's obviously a match, even though I had to do something completely different to get the markings than what the state is alleging happened to the actual piece of evidence. And she's pulling this off in her 112th case, trying to pull the wool over everybody's eyes, basically, by saying that this is science, because it's not. It's not a valid scientific comparison. And it's scary that she's done this 111 times prior to this, and who knows how many other times she may have testified incorrectly to something or done some kind of non-scientific experiment and try to uh, pull it off as some kind of scientific experiment and fool the jury and put innocent people away, perhaps. I don't know. This might not be her first time, is all I'm saying, because that's a lot of times testifying, and she's coming off competent and confident, and I got problems with her testing. So, anyways, let's move on. Have you done so in past state and federal jurisdictions? Yes, I have. Have you continued to testify since May of 2023 on work that you did prior to the departure from the Indiana State Police? Yes, I have. As recently as when? August would have been the last time that I testified as a firearms examiner. And you have the potential for continuing to be subpoenaed into court to testify on cases of yours? Yes, it could continue indefinitely. Where was that August testimony? It was in Marion County. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as States Exhibit 277. You recognize that? Yes, I do. What is it? This is a curriculum vitae, otherwise known as a resume, that was prepared by me, that has my qualifications, my education, and training that I have been exposed to while I was working at the Indiana State Police. Your Honor, I would move the admission of States Exhibit 277. States Exhibit offered. No objection, says Rosie. Court says, all right, without objection, 277 is admitted. Luttrell says, I would ask leave, Your Honor, to publish it to the jury. Court says, you may. Court says, you may proceed, Mr. Luttrell. Mr. Luttrell says, thank you, Your Honor. Does ISP Firearms Unit take proficiency tests? Yes, they do. Would you explain that to the jury, please? What is a proficiency test? A proficiency test is an exam that an analyst will take on a yearly basis. It's provided by an outside vendor, so it's not casework, not submitted by a law enforcement agency. It's actually submitted by an external private vendor, and that private vendor submits that to, we actually purchase them. They are submitted to our laboratory, and then an analyst will take them. That proficiency test is to basically check, is the analyst still proficient and able to work in the field. It tests their abilities and skills on an annual basis. That is basically what a proficiency test does. Were you, as a member of that team, were you subject to proficiency tests while you were at the Indiana State Police? Yes, I was. And did you pass those tests? Yes, I did. Can you tell the jury if you're aware of generally an examiner's performance in the field of firearms examination? Yes. So examiners can be performance checked to see how do examiners can have their performance checked to see how do examiners perform on tests that are created outside of the criminal justice system. Typically, they're referred to as what are called black box studies. These black box studies are aimed to assess examiner performance, and what they're doing is they're testing different things that an examiner may come across, such as subclass characteristics, consecutively manufactured firearms, longevity as far as like tests in between shots, could be length of time. And so different black box studies are created somewhat differently, but they are supposed to be created in a sense that it would be the hardest of what an examiner would come across in casework. So examiners can be tested on that, and they have developed examiner error rates based on those studies. And the reason those studies are done is because an examiner in real casework, in real life things that are submitted through a criminal justice system, an examiner does not know the error because they don't know the ground truth of the case. But black box studies, we can test examiners because we know the ground truth, because it's developed by somebody. They know the answers, and they're checking to see are the answers correct. Have you participated in any of those studies? Yes, I have. Is there anything more you can tell us about the results of those studies or anything else? So the analyst does not get the information back about how they performed on those tests because they are, Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point as well. I'm not sure that her testimony doesn't sound like it's connected to this circumstance in this case. Court says, Mr. Luttrell. Mr. Luttrell says, in fact, Your Honor, I believe it's an ethical responsibility she has to explain the area of the field and the examiner performance generally in her profession. Overruled. Thank you. Court says, you may answer. The witness says, may answer? Okay. So, examiners' performance on these tests, they are not 100% applicable to real life casework. They are basically applicable to what the examiner did in that testing scenario. And so, the upper bound of what a false positive would be in one of these studies, which means an examiner would come to an incorrect conclusion if so. A false positive in an incorrect conclusion that it should have been excluded versus identified. So the error rates in those studies are typically worst case scenario is about 2.2% of the time that an examiner would come to a false positive. A false negative, on the other hand, is when an examiner would exclude something that actually could have been included, and the error rate on that side of the equation is 2.87%. Thank you. You had prepared some images and some slides to help the jury understand your work and what you did in this particular case. Is that correct? That is correct. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and move now, and you'll want your binder with you. Will that be of assistance? Yes, please. If we could ask you to move towards the screen, so we want to begin with very basics of examining what is it that you do. Would you explain this to the jury, please? Yes. So, at its core, firearms identification or the examination of firearms or tool mark is basically a science that is used to determine whether a particular tool is used to create a tool mark. And this is an empirical based science where it's through observation. What is a tool and how are they made? So, in our discipline, we're not only concerned with the tools that we may receive, but we're also concerned with the tools that make the tools that we receive. But first, to describe what a tool actually is a tool is something that is a harder object that comes in contact with a softer object. If you like to think of your hand and running it through sand, your hand is a harder object and you're making a mark through sand. So, same thing here with tools. You can have, as I've described before, as a tool mark examiner, I can examine bolt cutters, I can examine pliers, and also the subset tool here of a firearm. And the firearm inside it has small tools that can come into contact with an ammunition component, such as a bullet, a cartridge case, or anything that might happen to go there, to go down there. But as an examiner, I'm not only interested in this, but I also need to know or want to know what makes these tools. So that's of interest and of value to us because, again, those tools are going to be harder and they're going to make marks on these tools. Those tools, meaning the tools that make these tools, are going to be harder than these tools? Correct. What is a tool mark? Did you understand that? You need to know the tools that make the tools because they're going to be harder than the tools that are used on the softer material. Yeah, okay. Correct. What is a tool mark? So, a tool mark basically, there are a couple different features of a tool mark. It can be either impressed or striated. If we go back to the sand and my hand example, if you take your hand through the sand, there's actually a striated mark. But if I took my hand and patted it on the sand, that's an impressed mark. In our discipline, you can have both impressed and striated at the same time. If you take a look at the lower left picture there, you'll actually see an impressed firing pin, and when the barrel dips into the firearm, it actually creates a striated, that's spelled wrong, striated drag mark here. So our examiner can assess both impressed and striated, and it can happen when the same tool with the same tool during a process. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. They can happen together. So they can happen, you can have both striated and impressed. Typically, with bullets, you're mostly going to see impressed marks, but with cartridges and cartridge cases, you can get a number of different actions going on depending on how that cartridge or cartridge case gets outside of the firearm. And you do have if you wish to use it, you do have a pointer there that, okay, might be of assistance. Thank you. Parts of a cartridge? So, what you're seeing here, just to give you some familiarity with what an examiner works with and some terminology that I'll be using throughout this presentation. She must have a PowerPoint presentation that she's going through pictures and stuff. Is first, we're going to look at what a cartridge is. Not only do I have it up here, but I also have a live model here that you can see. Basically, a cartridge is a single unit of ammunition. If I may interrupt you, Would you mind keeping your voice up and walk a little bit closer so to the jury so they're able to see this model? Yes. So basically, a cartridge is a single unit of ammunition. It is designed to go in a firearm and be fired. This unit of ammunition will have what's called a cartridge case, which is this area right here. This cartridge case has a primer here. The primer here can be nickel or brass. There are sometimes copper primers too. This area right here is where the firing pin inside the firearm comes in contact to it and with it when it's fired. It's a little bit softer in this area than the actual head. So this head area is a little bit harder than that softer primer area. And then also when this is fired, you're going to see the projectile go outside the firearm and then you'll be left with a cartridge case when it's fired. So you have a cartridge case when it's separated and you have a bullet there here, but together it's called a cartridge. So that's basic terminology here, just kind of keep you guys on track with what we're observing. I think she made that more confusing than actually explained it, but whatever. McLeland, or no, sorry, Luttrell says thank you. So if there's a reference to a bullet, technically the bullet is the end of that item that projects, uh, that is the projectile outside of the firearm. Correct, yes. So often people will confuse or use different slang terminology, and I may correct somebody here today, but I'm not trying to be mean. It's just I want to make sure everybody is on the same page with the same terminology so we can all understand it. Let's talk about one of the tools that you mentioned and its tool within its parts. What do we have here? So this is a picture of what is called a semi-automatic pistol. A semi-automatic pistol is designed to be fired with a magazine inserted into the bottom of it, and it is designed to be fired by pulling the trigger, and then you would pull the trigger again to fire it. So it's going to fire one round at a time. Just to go through some of the parts and terminology about what actually a firearm can consist of for a semi-automatic pistol. I'm just going to show you on here what they are. So up here, you're going to have the slide up here, the slide part, and you're going to see the serrated portions here. This allows a person to grip up top and move that slide to the rear. That's how you would load ammunition from a magazine. You'll see the magazine right here. That magazine gets inserted into the magazine gets inserted into the magazine. Is that what she said? Oh, the magazine well. The magazine well. There's also, I didn't know that's what it was called. There's also the grip area. You would be where you want to put your hand there. There's also a grip area. That would be where you would put your hand. Okay. The magazine release here is always you take the magazine out if you would like to. You also have the trigger guard and then the trigger is here. And this whole thing right here is considered the frame. Back here, this is an external hammer. You wouldn't always have an external hammer on every firearm. But this one in particular does. Sometimes they're internal and you won't be able to see them. Looking down at the top towards the inside of the firearm, what do you see here? So when you pull that slide to the rear, which I talked about using those serrated edges to pull back, you're going to see the magazine inserted in here. And as you look inside the firearm, there are different tools that a cartridge case, or bullet could come in contact with. There are what are called magazine lips right here from the magazine. Here is the ejector, here is the extractor, and here is the breech face. The ejector and the extractor work in a firearm by the ejector pushing a cartridge or a cartridge case out, and the extractor pulls it. So, as one's pushing, one's pulling, and that's how a cartridge or a cartridge case would be moved outside of a firearm. To the side of here, this is just instead of looking on top, you're looking at the side view here where you can see the ejector again, as well as the extractor and the breech face. Does the jury need to know all of this? Because I just found that very confusing. And I mean, we don't have the pictures of her presentation, but it's still, I would think, confusing. And on that image to the left, just make sure we're oriented. Where is the barrel on that? So the barrel would be right down this way, and this would be, if you were holding a firearm, that would be towards you. So this is the back portion, and this would be whatever you wanted to point it at. That extractor and ejector that you're talking about are examples of two internal tools inside the pistol. Is that correct? That's correct. What do we see here? Here, you're actually seeing the opposite end. You're seeing the barrel as you see going forward. You're also seeing a cartridge coming from a magazine that would go up this feed ramp right here. It's basically like a little elevator into the chamber area of the firearm. This area is your chamber face. This is the slide part up right up here. And so as you pull the slide to the rear, that cartridge is going to load right up to the elevator as this area right here indicates and into the chamber. So, which is harder, the tools in the firearm or the cartridge? Typically, the tools in the firearm are going to be harder than what is coming in contact with it, whether it be a bullet, a cartridge case, or a cartridge. The chamber face, Ms. Oberg, how is it shaped? This one has a U shape. So, this one has a U shape to it right here. What you'll see if you actually directly look down on it, you'll see that, and there'll be a little recessed portion behind it connected to the barrel. What do we have here? So here, you're going to see the cycling of a cartridge, and this is the first step as to when a cartridge is cycled. So when you see a cartridge in the magazine and you see that the ejector is on top of this, that's because it has not been cycled and loaded up in the chamber yet. So this is basically in the magazine ready to be pulled fully to the rear. Since this slide isn't pulled fully to the rear, that's why this ejector can sit on top of there for right now. Once the analyst moves it all the way to the rear, it'll pop up into the place with the elevator and into the chamber. So this is right before it's cycled into the chamber of the firearm. And what do we see in this image? In this image, you're going to see the after portion. So it was loaded up into the chamber area. And then you're actually seeing the extractor and ejector cycle the cartridge out. So they're showing in these images what it looks like to cycle the cartridge out, just like the way that they're theorizing this piece of evidence came out of Allen's gun. So right here, the extractor, like I talked about before, it pulls just like a little claw, and then the ejector over here is coming into contact with the other side of the cartridge head over here. And so at that point, once you pull it fully to the rear, the cartridge will exit to the side of the firearm. By the extractor and ejector working in tandem in a sense to eject that? Correct, and also the motion of pulling the slide to the rear. So what just happened there? So in that video, oh, she's showing video, I guess, in her presentation. So in that video, that's like the first picture I had spoken about. You are pulling the slide to the rear and the cartridge is chambering into the barrel of the firearm. The next cycling video, what does it display? This is just like the second part of the picture that you saw. This would be somebody retracting the slide to the rear and the extractor and ejector moving the cartridge to the side of the firearm. So the cartridge in this image is already up where? Located where? It'll be in the chamber at this point. You were prepared to demonstrate for the jury yourself, which would include them being able to see a physical. You physically doing this cycling process along with the sound of the cycling, correct? Yes. I'm going to hand you what's been admitted into evidence, states Exhibit 276, and ask you would remove it from the packaging. Before I do so, ask, do you recognize this box? Yes. So the outside of this box has the Indiana State Police Laboratory label on it, It also has my identifiers marked in red here with my initials and the item number and the case number, as well as the seals here. If you would please, I'd like to ask you to take I'll just move it here to this table and give you a surface. Take Exhibit 276 if you would, insert the magazine, and what type of cartridges do we have here? These are dummy cartridges. They're 40 Smith& and Wesson caliber dummy cartridges. And we have scissors and gloves there. For members of this courtroom, I'm going to check to make sure this firearm is unloaded and look down the barrel to make sure it's empty. I'm also able to stick my finger in there. This is nothing in here right now. So this firearm is considered safe and unloaded right now. I'm going to take this magazine that has dummy cartridges in it. I'm going to insert it into the magazine that we talked about earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and cycle one round in here. Now, there's a couple different ways that a person can cycle a firearm. The first way I'm going to do it is how I typically do it, which I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close the slide here. I'm going to insert the magazine into here and I'm going to go ahead and pull the slide to the rear and let it go forward and then cycle around. She does so. So that demonstrates one, and then it's extracted and ejected. There is another way that someone can do this. If I were to take the round out that's in the chamber and go ahead and cycle it, another way that you can do that is actually pull the slide to the rear. You can insert the magazine and then you can drop the slide like that and then cycle it again. And then the last round, the last way, when there's no more in the magazine, it'll lock to the rear. What does it mean when we say there's a cartridge, there's no cartridge in the chamber? What does that mean? When there's no cartridge in the chamber, it can potentially mean that someone has loaded the magazine and they have not cycled a cartridge into the chamber yet. So the chamber can be empty, and if you pull the trigger, nothing would happen. You would have to cycle the first round in there. Now you can have a fully loaded magazine. Go ahead and insert one into the chamber, and then you'd be ready to go and not have to cycle the firearm. If there's no cartridge in the chamber, then that process that you just did with the slide would then lift a cartridge to the chamber? Correct. Yeah, as long as you pull fully to the rear. But then the next time that action's done, there would be an ejection of the cartridge. Correct. Yes. When you do your examinations of cartridges and bullets in cartridge cases, you were looking for various characteristics. Is that correct? Yes, I am. What are those characteristics? Characteristics can be class characteristics, subclass characteristics, and individual characteristics. So this slide, what does this help you explain to the jury? So the first step in any process when an examiner starts to do their work looking at the items that they receive, they'll be interested in class characteristics. Class characteristics do not allow an examiner to individualize. They only allow an examiner to narrow the pool of candidates down. Class characteristics are basically measurable features that are pre-designed by the manufacturer, so they would be in blueprints and so forth, and the manufacturer already knows what's going to happen. Class characteristics can consist in firearms of things like number of lands and grooves in the barrel. Lands and grooves in the barrel of the firearm are hills and valleys, and they impart spin to the bullet when it exits the end of the barrel, just like a football player throwing a football. There can be a certain number of these lands and grooves. You can have anywhere from about 2 to 18. So certain manufacturers will manufacture differently and they'll have certain numbers. You can also have what's called a right or a left twist. Uh, so you might have a right twist, a six right, which would be six lands and grooves with a right twist, in a particular firearm manufacturer or a certain subset of manufacturers could manufacture their firearms that way. So you won't be able to exclude based on class characteristics, but you could narrow the potential pool. If you'd like to think of class characteristics in your real life, everyday to day operations in what you do, think of going to a car manufacturing parking lot and you're going to go buy a car. You may show up to buy that car and you know specifically that you're looking for a sedan. So if you go to that lot, you can already you can already eliminate anything that's an SUV, anything that's a truck, because you know specifically that you are looking for a sedan. So that's a way to narrow it down. It's pre designed by the manufacturer what a truck's going to look like, what an SUV is going to look like, and what a sedan's going to look like. So again, cross characteristics narrow it down, but they don't allow you to ID. As far as cartridges and cartridge cases goes, there are different shapes and sizes of ejectors, extractors, as well as firing pins, and also different shapes and sizes to potentially breach face marks. What are subclass characteristics? So, subclass characteristics help me narrow it down. Subclass characteristics are those characteristics that are not pre designed by the manufacturer. They actually occur typically during the manufacturing process. They can occur just due to wear of things, but they can typically occur during the manufacturing process. They lower the pool of candidates that can happen from that. So, they don't give you the ability to identify, but they do happen typically during a lot of or a run of a manufacturer may run on a particular day. So they would be more restricted than class, but not as restricted as individual characteristics. What do you mean by lot? A lot could be whatever that manufacturer manufactures on that day. So different manufacturers consider lots different ways, but it could be the time that the machine is run on that day, or that's what's considered a lot. Yes. Um, oh, sorry, totally skipped a question. In your work as an analyst, have you studied and visited any firearms manufacturing places? Yes, I've been to several out in the East Coast as well as in Illinois and Ohio. If we can actually just go back to the last picture, sorry, just to talk about these two pictures that are here that you see at the bottom of the screen. These are how an analyst can actually recognize subclass characteristics. Typically, subclass characteristics can be recognized because they typically have long lines and they usually extend the depth of the area that is seen on a tool mark. That's not always, but it is typical. It's a way an analyst can start to recognize subclass characteristics, even if they don't have a firearm. In this picture, these two pictures, what I'm showing you here is that on the breech face here, these long lines here will actually extend all the way to this side as well. An analyst can look on a scope and they can see that these match up on this side, meaning that these marks cannot be used for identification purposes, but they do help narrow down the pool of candidates. Same thing here in an ejector. You can see these marks run the entire length. Now there are marks in between those lines, but in between those long lines that an examiner can boost up the microscope to look for individual characteristics so you can look at subclass. It doesn't mean that you don't have individual or other characteristics going on at that time. We'll get to this in a little bit, but there's a line down the middle. The image on the right, there's a line down the middle you can see. Explain to the jury what you would mean up there, or what that would mean up there. This line that you're actually seeing right here is called a hairline. So it's when an examiner would look through a comparison microscope. These are actually two different objects being compared together, so it'd be like if you had cartridge case 1 and cartridge case 2, you're putting it on the scope, so you'll see that line in the middle. It's also represented over here. Now, we have individual characteristics. Explain that to the jury. So, individual characteristics are those characteristics that allow an examiner to identify back to a particular firearm or a particular tool if one is submitted. Individual characteristics can arise from different manufacturing processes. They can also arise from the way that a projectile or a cartridge case interacts with the inside of the firearm. So, there are different things that can occur. There's a lot of edges inside of firearms that can create striated marks. Here, what you're looking at these two pictures here. This is actually ejector shear right here. This is the coming together of two different areas here, and the ejector shear is individual in nature because it's coming to a point and it's being sheared across to get to that information. What the hell is she talking about? I don't understand. Here is also shear created from the firing pin aperture hole to the breech face, and so that this is giving us individual marks there. This picture right here was actually on the last slide. You saw the subclass here that agreed, but the individual over here and the shear actually doesn't agree. So examiners can see subclass that may agree, but if the individual over here does not agree, it means that it would have been produced on the same day, but it's not individual back to the particular firearm. So she's narrowing down some particular marks that she's narrowing it down to the manufacturing process or whatever the lot process that she was talking about, not the firearm making those marks. I think you explained this, but where do subclass characteristics, what produces them? It's typically during the manufacturing process. So it's the way, whatever type of manufacturing process has occurred, it can leave that behind on the surfaces. So it would be as I talked about it before, you have yourself as the tool. But say you have a parent, that parent that manufactures the tool itself is what leaves behind those marks. So, on a particular lot, you're going to have likely, it would be unusual to have subclass characteristics shared by those cartridges. That's correct. But within those subclasses or in between those characteristics, you can see on occasion, you can find individual characteristics. There is the potential, yes. Potential. How are individual characteristics how do they come to be? Individual characteristics are also throughout the manufacturing process. They are those tools that also make this. So it's not as though it's just subclass or individual. They can be made within the same tool. Typically, it occurs during the finishing processes of the tools that come into contact and make the tools that are inside the firearm. So those individual characteristics can occur during the manufacturing process, but they can also occur during the use and abuse of a firearm. Think of the car example that I gave to you before about looking for class characteristics. So you drive your new, nice, shiny car off the lot and you take it to the Walmart or whatever, and somebody opens the door on it, and now you have this nice new red ding on the side of your pretty white car. That would be an individual characteristic. So it's something that happened throughout the use and abuse over the life of that type of object, but in firearms, it can also happen during the manufacturing process as well as throughout the life of the firearm. You may prefer to cover this a little bit later. You can let me know, but are you researched and studied and aware of studies on consecutively made tools, firearms, ammunition, or other tools? Have you studied that? There are research articles that have been out there published about consecutively made objects, and the reason that we are so interested in that is because that anything made at the same time during the same manufacturing process, we as a community want to know, can an examiner tell the difference from those consecutively made items? So it is of interest to us as examiners because that is the hardest, most difficult thing that an examiner would come across is something that is consecutively made. So there is research devoted to this. I've also taken tests that are consecutively made to see if examiners can decipher the differences. And what did you learn? Were you able to decipher the differences of tools that were made one right after another on the machine? I took the 10 barrel test, which is a popular test in our field that is not a black box study, but it is a test that does look at consecutiveness, and I did pass that test. I have also taken black box studies that have consecutiveness in them. Unfortunately, on those studies, since we're anonymous, we're not allowed to get our answers back, so I don't know what my answers are, but I can tell you what the overall stats of those are. And what are those? The overall stats of one of the studies is about 1.5% for false positives and it's about 2.87% for false negatives. Okay, 1.5% as a false positive on consecutive, discerning consecutive made barrels. In the black box study, it would have consisted of things more than just consecutively made, but there were consecutively made stuff in those black box studies. So that was not purely consecutively made, but there were parts that were consecutively made in it. Okay. I want to talk to you, Ms. Oberg, about the keys to being able to perform these examinations and come and determine class characteristics, subclass, and individual. I believe this bullet point. Could you use this to explain to the jury what allows you to make these determinations? Yes. So on the slide, what you're seeing is numerous things that an examiner learns and is trained throughout their years of experience as well as in their initial training program. So at the Indiana State Police and our training program, we have a whole section dedicated to looking at subclass marks and being able to identify them and look at them through the use of an examiner has to build their own library of different types of manufacturing processes and looking at videos and what those manufacturing processes are like. Also, an examiner before they are released to do casework at the Indiana State Police has to complete the 10-barrel test in order to perform casework. So they are exposed to consecutiveness on multiple occasions. So it's not only training by reading and looking at videos, but it's also the application of it. There's also research that an analyst can read about and look at pictures and have been taken by other examiners to show what they should be aware of and like, what things can look like. So the research that they can read is typically in the AFTE journal, but it can also be published in other journals as well, such as the Journal of Forensic Sciences. The other thing is during those processes that I just mentioned, one will learn the manufacturing process of firearms. A lot of uh, a lot of that is done. You can either do it through videos, but you can also take tours of firearms manufacturers. So, as I stated earlier, that I have toured various firearms manufacturers and I can learn the processes that they use during the time of manufacturing, so I am able to understand how a firearm is manufactured. During the examination process, there is what's called you could do direct observation or indirect observation. Direct observation would be where the examiner looks at the tool that is coming into contact with the actual item that is being marked. There's two parts here to this direct observation. The first is looking at the tool if you have it. If you don't have it, such as any proficiency or any black box study, you don't receive the tool. You only receive test fires that are provided by the manufacturer. So in firearms, primarily, you're talking about the tool would be the actual firearm? Correct, yes. And sometimes you are asked to do an examination or you're asked to participate in a study, a test, essentially, where you don't have the firearm to use to compare. Correct. So any proficiency test that I receive or any black box study I receive, I do not receive the firearm. So an analyst is able to directly observe on the ammunition that they receive and because they have had other trainings and research, they are able to deduce most of the time what might have marked that area and what areas to be able of not to use. What? And what to be aware of not to use. Okay. The indirect observation part comes from looking at the firearm using what is called microcell. Uh, Casting material. You can use a different type of casting material, but typically at the Indiana State Police, we use microcell, where you would actually inject the casting material into the firearm and you would take it out. You can use this to look at what is the tool looks to see what the tool looks like at a finer level potentially. You could use that on a comparison microscope and compare it to your test fires. You could compare it to any evidence that is received. The next portion would be scope magnification. As I talked about early on, when you have subclass characteristics or even the potential or any examination that you're doing, you might want to go up in magnification level so that you're not just looking at superficial agreement. You want to look at the fine detail in between the superficial agreement. The last part is more than one area. So, if an examiner suspects that there might be potential subclass or just a general, it's a good habit to, if you're going to make an identification or any type of comparison, even if it isn't an identification, you want to look at more than one area. So, as I showed you before, I showed you the breech face marks that were subclass. The flowback area, the sheared area was a different area. So, looking at different areas allows an examiner to look at different types of tools that may have come into contact with the object. All I can say about Melissa Oberg is she's very long-winded and her descriptions are confusing, especially for us who aren't in the room. You can't see what she's pointing at and things like that. And the different tools would be like the extractor, the ejector, the chamber area. Correct. And so forth. Explain the process that you follow for various levels of examination. The first step on the examination process with getting the evidence starts with a level 1 analysis. A level 1 analysis is basically assessing the condition of any type of evidence that I receive, from the outside packaging all the way through the inside, taking descriptive notes and so forth. So the first part is there anything missing? Is there anything broken? Is there any type of biological material? Is there anything adhering to it? That's the first initial. Any time I open a package of evidence, I'm looking at that type of stuff. So the next part of this level 1 analysis is actually assessing for class characteristics. So I receive a firearm. I'm going to want to know what type of class characteristics it has, such as caliber, number of lands and grooves, areas and locations of extractor and ejector, shape of firing pin, and so forth. So basically, I'm looking at all the class characteristics, shapes, potential widths of lands and grooves, the direction of the twist, the height of the bullet. So all of those class characteristics that we talked about before is in this level 1 analysis, and that is either applied to the firearm is one if one is received, and any type of ammunition component if one is received. What is level 2? So level 2 analysis starts with the second part of the process and essentially as a firearm, if a firearm is submitted, the firearm at that time will be test fired. It will not only be test fired, but it'll undergo a function exam to see if there's anything wrong with the firearm, and it'll be test fired multiple times. These test fires are basically what create a visual image of what the inside of the firearm looks like. These test fires can be cycled, or they can be actually fired so that can occur at the time during the testing process. The next step of that is to use what is called a comparison microscope. A comparison microscope is two microscopes hooked together with an optical bridge. It allows the viewer to view two objects simultaneously. It allows the viewer to manipulate the lighting. It also allows the viewer to view it at different magnification levels. So basically, you're going to have object 1, object 2, and you're doing a manual comparison of each object that you're looking at. You're not only assessing for the class characteristics, but at this time is the point when you start assessing also as well for subclass and individual marks. So that is the final part of level 2 analysis. How essential is the comparison microscope to the work you do? It is basically the prime thing that allows an examiner to make the conclusions that they can make. So, it is the essential part of learning how to move it, manipulate it, and the lighting aspect of it. It also is what takes pictures for us. How unlike looking at a photo like the ones you've already shown us from a comparison microscope, how much unlike a photo is what you see through the comparison microscope? Looking through the comparison microscope is like watching a movie. So, from start to finish, you're looking at everything that's involved. So, if you were to watch the movie E.T., you would see the whole thing, the start, the plot, the finish. The unfortunate part is she has a lot of analogies to try to explain the stuff that she's trying to explain. If she could just explain it like a normal person, then and not use all the like huge words when explaining everything, she could, make it make sense for the jurors. But instead she's like, "No, let me compare it to the movie E.T." What? You're comparing bullet microscope analysis, firearm tool mark analysis to the movie E.T. Okay. The unfortunate part is that our reading of this does not occur through the entire movie. We can only take pictures at certain points. So when you see a picture, it'd be like if you take a picture of a boy riding a bike in ET, you only see that part of it. You don't see everything that has elapsed and been done during the examination process. This process is basically for the examiner to remind them of what they came across during their examination process. But the pictures themselves do not in any way represent anything that was seen at the time of the examination process. And at this point, I just stop here. I think we're going to stop here for the day. We'll pick up tomorrow right where we left off in the middle of Melissa Oberg's direct. Like I said, she's on the stand for a while, so we'll be hearing for her for a little bit. Um, and you can see she's very long-winded, so that's probably part of the reason why she's on the stand for so long. Her answers are, I'm out of breath just reading her responses. So, anyways, that is where we will conclude for today. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate you. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe on your way out if you haven't done so already. And I will see you tomorrow with a continuation of Melissa Oberg's direct testimony for the state on her firearms examination. So we will continue tomorrow. Thank you guys. Take care. Bye now.